Okay, people are starting to join the webinar now. So welcome to everybody that is joining us this evening. Welcome to today's webinar, which is jointly hosted by GIS, Global Institute of Sport, and ACPE, the Australian College of Physical Education. My name is Gareth Long. I'm currently here in Sydney Olympic Park, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all along to this webinar, where for the next hour or so, we're going to be exploring talent identification and talent development across three different football codes, rugby league, AFL, and soccer football, and also across Australia and the UK. And before we do start, I'd like to welcome my co-host, Ray Boggiano from Global Institute of Sport. How you going, Ray?
All good. Good evening, Gareth, and good evening or good morning, everyone, depending where in the world you're tuning in from. So, yeah, I'm Ray Boggiano. I'm Regional Director for Global Institute of Sport. I'm based in Sydney, although I've come here from the other side of the world, as you can probably tell from my accent as well. Just a few words quickly on who Global Institute of Sport are, if you're tuning in from ACPE or from elsewhere in the industry. So we deliver master's degrees and professional education in football and wider sports. Our courses are delivered online around the world with unique access to iconic stadiums. So they include Wembley Stadium, Old Trafford and Melbourne Cricket Ground. And our degrees cover the likes of coaching and analysis, and then management, administration, and marketing and media as well. So I'll drop my details in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to learn more. I'll also be selecting questions from the chat to ask our panelists. So please do write your questions in there. Don't forget to include your name, the age group if you're a coach, the sport and subject area if you're a student, where in the world you're based. All of that information would be useful for our panelists to direct their answers to you. And other than that, I'll be sitting back and enjoying the discussion as well. So enjoy.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, just to reiterate, we want this to be. We want to ask our panelists to answer your questions. So please make sure you put those in, and also share your knowledge from your code, your club, or your thoughts. And Ray will be monitoring those. One of the great things about this webinar is how we've been able to connect experts from different football codes, clubs, and countries. And we're going to gain insights from all of our panelists, and it'll help us think about what we currently do regarding talent ID and development in our own context, and perhaps what else we could do. So moving on, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's outstanding panel, who bring with them not only a wealth of expertise into the theory and research of talent ID and development, but also its real-world application in elite club academies and pathway programs. So firstly, I'm going to introduce Dr. Stuart Wilkinson. Stuart is the current reserve grade head coach at Super League's Salford Red Devils, and also a senior lecturer in sport coaching and performance at the University of Central Lancashire. Prior to that, Stuart has travelled the world in various coach and high performance roles, including head coach of Serbia Rugby League, Russia Rugby League, Wales Rugby League, and some other roles include head of youth performance at Leeds Rhinos and England Rugby League high performance coach. I only found out just before we logged on that Stuart also played rugby league in Australia. So he has a link to our Australian audience members as well. Stuart's PhD was in talent development within professional academies. So that's really useful for tonight's discussion. Welcome to the webinar, Stuart.
Thanks, Gareth, and hello, everybody. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Stuart. We'll be hearing from you very soon. Okay, I'm next going to introduce Dr. Mike Walsh. Mike leads the academic team for all programs as Principal of Global Institute of Sport. Mike also has almost 25 years of coaching experience, working across the game from professional club academies to semi-professional clubs. He has coached at Manchester United, Manchester City, Preston North End, Blackpool and Bolton, and is currently coaching for Liverpool in their academy. Mike is also a coach educator at the English FA, a UEFA A licensed qualified coach, and holds a PhD in applied sport and exercise science. Thanks for joining us today, Mike.
Thanks, Gareth. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, and look forward, obviously, to hearing Mike's insights into across those academies in football in the UK. And last but not least, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Stephen Kelly. Stephen has over 15 years of experience in the sport and exercise industry, including 13 years with elite professional teams. Stephen is currently the head of physical development for the Sydney Swans AFL women's team. Prior to this role, Stephen spent 10 years as the head of physical development for the Sydney Swans Academy and 8 years as an assistant strength and conditioning coach within the Sydney Swans senior men's team. Prior to working for Sydney Swans, Stephen spent 3 years working for the Sydney Roosters Rugby League Club, covering several roles, including sports scientist and strength and conditioning coach. Stephen's PhD covered physical profiling of junior athletes within Australian football. Pleasure to have us to have you join us, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Thanks for the introduction, mate.
No worries, no worries. Okay, so you can see that we've not only got 3 academics and 3 highly experienced, high-performance professionals, but also we've got 3 clubs that are all seeking to develop talent in both the male and female teams. And also 3 clubs that represented that are synonymous with the colour red. All of that was deliberately planned and by no means coincidental. So look, let's start. The plan is that we'll have quite a relaxed question and answer with our panel. We'll have 2 rounds of questions, but we'll have a pause so that Ray can ask some of your questions on your behalf to our panelists. So again, urge you to not leave a question in your head and get it in that panel, and hopefully people are introducing themselves in the chat now. Okay, first round of questions. I'm going to go to you first, Stuart, and it's a big question, but I think it's a really important one. What are the key criteria or characteristics that Salford Reds use in making talent selection decisions?
I think this obviously got legs. It could go on and on, couldn't it? But if I can give you some background to start with, when I first moved from coaching to academy coaching, professional coaching, in 1995, it's then it dawned on me that these have come from where they need a pathway. They're on a pathway and they're going in other places. So that's when it dawned on me that the professional pathways and academy coaching are more about talent development, identifying talent, rather than just turning up and rocking up for a game. They were all there for a purpose. Talent ID, was around, and it was more about, in those days, just the competencies that are obvious that you can see. Can they pass? Can they tackle? Are they fast? Have they got evasion skills? Yes, that was measured in 1995. They would score them on that. Physical competencies. To where it looks like today, where there's a term that everybody uses now that's sort of a surrogate of social cultural factors, a club's DNA. Hidden things. So those micro cultures that athletes have has been developed. That's what it looks like today, in essence. Really, is yes, there's still the players in rugby league in particular. They're harder to hide than they are to find. They're well signposted. There's not a tremendous amount of them playing in the northwest of England, and the kids that are already on scholarships are registered and signposted. You can't go near them till the window of opportunity. So it's very, very easy to spot talent in rugby league, particularly in the northwest. But it's getting under the fabric of that, and if they're the right for your environment. So clubs are really, culturally aligned, and they ever have been, about, is this person the right one for us? All right. So, it's dead easy to find the top 5 players in a certain position in the Northwest, but none of them could fit what you're really looking for in terms of, you know, your social cultural factors, your DNA, until you started to get them into the building, you started to work with them, and the coaches start to do their good work with them as well. So yes, obvious stuff. But they're not, you know, clubs in rugby league aren't, it's not random anymore. They don't just want the best players anymore. They do run good successions. So, you know, why would one club have an 18-year-old international, a 16-year-old international, and a 14-year-old international in the same position? They would make a judgment call on which one of those is best aligned to how he's going to get through. So, and what's in the first team at the moment, in the reserves, how old are they? When are the contracts up? Will that 18-year-old or 16-year-old be able to do that job once the talent's been developed? So it's quite sophisticated nowadays, and based on a lot of things that the fabric of the club, the culture of the club, their micro cultures, are they all aligned? Never mind their athletic ability, or the strength, or the passing ability, or the rugby knowledge, and you know, how well they understand X's and O's. It's more about how well they are aligned they are to the, you know, the club's DNA. I mean, Paul Rowley, the head coach we've got at the moment, he's a really resourceful coach, and you know, he talks about our DNA being the red thread. I won't go into that. That's Paul's secret potion, but that's what he uses when he does his forensic examination on talent. And yes, he's developed talent, so he's been at clubs where he's had to develop talent, and now he's at the top of the food chain, out coaching most of the Super League each year with a club that's not as well resourced. So when we talk about talent, we've got aligned to those social cultural factors more. I'm not giving you too much here, guys. More than we do with the normal competencies of what it looked like in the mid-90s. It's really evolved because coaching and science and the sports evolved. I suppose that there's a number of questions there for anybody, and I could keep going, but I best knock it on the head at this point because I'll give you a bit of an insight.
Stuart, that's great, because I think, you know, I've got kind of three big messages from that. One, that some things are the same, that they've always been, you know, the technical aspects and the physical aspects are really important. But I think you're sort of saying there's another layer in there that's evolved around the social cultural aspects, which are quite unique to different clubs. I like the red thread, and I understand why you can't go into specifics. And then the bit that I must admit, a bit of a light bulb for me was that succession. Okay, so you know, where do you really need talent, and where might you need it quite soon, or in a longer term? So hopefully I've paraphrased those messages accurately.
Yeah, there's a couple of good stories in there. So if I can narrate them, I remember when I went to work for Leeds Rhinos as head of youth performance and coaching there, and this was like in the late 90s, early 2000s. They'd really stockpiled talent. Okay, so there was just overflowing with it, and yes, everybody from the game was benefiting from it. Some clubs in West Yorkshire didn't need to run a pathway or an academy because they would benefit from the overspill. But also, you know, it dawned on me there, they've got kids travelling from Cumbria, from the Northwest, from Hull. A lot of pressure on people and parents to transport them through. So yeah, it was probably a huge investment, an organisational commitment from the club, but with a very, very little return, because it was only a minimum we're getting through. But we needed to find what that minimum looked like, and were we actually coaching it, were we programming for it, were we conditioning for it throughout those junior years. So that's what it looked like then, and of course now it's really precise in what they're doing. You know, clubs will investigate a kid if he's what they want, regardless of where he sits in terms of everybody's view that he's the top standoff in the Northwest. He might not match a club's own ecological view on talent.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you very much. Mike, I'm going to come to you. Stuart's given us a bit of an insight into the what are you looking for? And I'd love you to perhaps build on that, but give us an insight into how and where does Liverpool look for young potential talent?
Thanks, Gareth. Yeah. Thanks, Stuart. I think one thing we've got in football or soccer, I suppose, in the Northwest is such a hotbed of football. I was trying to work out then how many teams are actually in the Northwest, but I suppose the main four who are fighting over the players are Liverpool, Everton, Man United, Manchester City. And I'm probably going to focus more now on the younger age groups and getting the talent in, that pre-academy and foundation phase, because as you get older, and there's restrictions on, but again, that a lot of it's down if it comes from other clubs or it comes from your category 2, 3, or 4 clubs that teams identify. That's normally done through compensation and transfer fees. But at the younger age groups and for all clubs, it's a lot still comes through grassroots in the door, really. Liverpool, I think itself is such a diverse area, diverse place, multicultural, and I think it's one thing that we've done really good has been looking in them little areas as well. And I think of different areas, not just the traditional areas, but areas where we know there's different populations where we can look at different talent. But on the whole, we have scouts who will be out at games, grassroots games, schools, and especially when we start looking really at 5 is when we've have players coming in, have loads of players into the club then, and then it's kind of then they come in, and again restricted of how the distance you've got with 1 hour really traveling distance, which makes sense really at that young age. You don't really want kids traveling 2 hours to come training. No, sometimes even traveling from Manchester to Liverpool at that rush hour can take you 2 hours. So that's a one restriction you've got really. And then the I suppose the other challenge you've got is when clubs train, but them kids will come in at under 5, just for one night a week, and then when they move up to under 6s, they will can play one game and train once a week, and then with 7s and 8s, 7s again to 1 and 1, 8s is training twice and playing one game. But on the 7s and 8s, we tend to invite a lot of grassroots teams to come in and play us, which again is a good recruitment tool to have a look at players and see how they compete, and especially if we know there's some good teams in the area. Again, a good opportunity to come and look at them. By playing, again, Premier League rules dictate that we can't play professional clubs, especially under 8s, until after the Christmas period before they sign under 9. We also have the development centres, where kids who've been scouted will go in there and have some training sessions on, and then what tend to do is from them sessions invite the best ones from the development centres into the academy and do some training at certain times of the year, and then that's normally run by the age group coach in the academy. So any players from the grassroots clubs who've come into development centres, again, anyone that fancy will then come in on a trial, and you're talking from under 9s to under 12s, where they'll come in, sign a form and come in a kind of a 6 to 8 week trial with the club really, where they'll get to train 3 times a week, playing games, so the club can get a really good look at them really. Other clubs are thinking it's all down to resource. Some clubs won't have development centres. Some clubs, the kids will come straight into that academy environment, and I think that can be sometimes quite hard for kids to come straight in like that, especially if they've never been in that area before. They might not have as much time, whereas with your category 1 clubs, you've got a little bit more time. You can see what they're like in the development centre just by bringing them down into the training sessions. We're bringing more talent together, and being in that environment helps them as well. And then I think across the 9s and 10s, we've got we've got a couple of trialists now, and we've not really gone with big groups of players that have signed at 9 in the last couple of years. I think we've signed this year 16 outfield players and 2 goalkeepers. So that gives room for talent to come in at 9, 10, 11 and understand the late developer. And especially with goalkeepers, I suppose this leads into a question a little bit later on, but with goalkeepers, we understand that goalkeepers probably the ones who are going to be a little bit more later developed. So again, there's that pathway for keepers to come in. And what we tend to do with the goalkeepers is allow the keepers to play down a year. So we might find an under-9s goalkeeper, and he might come and train with the under-8s, and we'll have a look what he's like with the under-8s first before we go in. Obviously, unless they're exceptional talent, then they might go straight in. But again, that's kind of been the process of coming in. But regular scouting meetings, the scouts are not only out there coaching, out there scouting, but they're often a lot of the time they're in the club watching, looking at what's going on, the under-9s, the under-10s, the 11s, the pre-academy. So they're kind of known, they're really in bed with it of what the club needs, what the talent they've got, and what the level is of that age group, really.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. That's a really good insight into, I suppose, what Premier League clubs, in the case of Liverpool, will do in football. And it was one of the things I, really was excited about this webinar was the comparisons. And on one hand, you got Stuart saying, talent will stand out in the northwest of England because there's not so many people playing. And then in your context, you're in the hotbed of football. And so I think if I've got three sort of things out there. One was that sort of the importance of context, which might shape how you go about identifying and developing talent. And in your case, it seems to be, and correct me if I've misinterpreted it, please, Mike, that it's important to throw that net wide and throw it in places where you may not have always looked traditionally, and keep that open. As don't close it as soon as you've thrown that net out. Throw out other nets, and then the importance of educating the scouts as well, so that they're aligned with using Stuart's terminology, the club's DNA. So hopefully that sort of sums up some of those key messages that you said in the answer to that question.
Yeah, and just to add some of the points that Stuart said as well, it's some of the players, the decisions the kids make when they're signing, or parents, does align to different clubs and different culture and philosophy at the clubs and how they develop talent, really. So again, you got probably the four big clubs, probably two are quite similar to each other in terms of some of their beliefs, and two are different. So again, sometimes it fits with the profile and that of the player. But again, we do have a lot of Manchester kids in there, and just because someone might be a Man United fan doesn't mean that. In fact, one of our better players actually this season is a big Man United fan and probably could have the opportunity to go there, but signed for Liverpool, which is good, really. So again, sometimes that, but on the opposite side, we've lost players because the big Blues or the big Everton fans, and they don't want to and they can't see themselves moving across and wearing that red jersey. So
can't upset the
sometimes
family.
it happens. Yeah, can't upset the family. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Well, we're going to keep this really fluid. I was going to go to Stephen, but Stuart's got his hand up. So Stuart, jump in.
Yeah, I won't take too much time. I just wanted to throw in at this point what a great donor sport soccer is for rugby league. Now, you did mention before that, the kids in the northwest of England stand out. But when you watch school games in particular, I remember being at Leeds, I was watching a couple of school games play at under 16 level. I was like, wow, how good are these? Because we were playing at our training ground. Oh, you've no chances at Leeds United. Or you've no chances at Rotherham. Or you've no chances at Man United. And I thought, I need a relationship with these football academy coaches. And there was a couple of really, really good kids at Leeds that had never played community sport, but they were playing for the school. I knew they were at Rotherham, so I approached the head of youth at Rotherham. I got them in the end because they didn't want them. Both of them went on to the British Lions. And didn't even play academy, but the transferable skills that they had for the positions they played. But this is something I know that might pop up later on. So while we're limited and competitive in the north of England, we do have a good footprint and we do spot talent. But generally, like Manchester in particular, Salford, and Leeds in particular, the soccer mad cities. That's what they want to do. But they end up, a lot of them being being a great donor sport for rugby league. So I'll just leave it at that one, really, because I know that's got legs as well. So we benefit, everything that Mike's just spoke about, we benefit from when they're 17 and 18.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks. That's leaving it tantalising for the second half, where we look at talent transfer, which is something that's I think very, very interesting. So I look forward to exploring that in more detail. Okay, right, back over to Australia with Stephen now. Stephen, I get all these questions are so big that we could explore them in a lot more detail. But how does Sydney Swans determine the success of its talent development program? And I know you might have to explain a little bit about the AFL landscape and Sydney compared to Victoria in your answer, but I'm really interested in how does Sydney Swans know that its talent development program has been successful?
Yeah, it is. It is a very complex system, Garrett. And anyone who's worked in rugby league and soccer, it'll be a totally foreign system for them. So just a bit of background. AFL development is different in every state. So Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia is the heartland for producing talent. And within those states, it is slightly different. But Victoria, say, it's club and school based. And school have a big sway over getting the kids at certain times of year. Western Australia, similar, club based, and South Australia. So the AFL, sort of early 2000s, mid 2000s, looked at New South Wales, Queensland, non-AFL states, rugby league, rugby union, and said, okay, how can we develop the talent in these states? So they basically came together with the clubs, so the four main clubs, when Gold Coast and GWS, the other Sydney team, come in, and sort of part-funded academy system within those states. So essentially that was a pathway for any kid that wanted to play AFL. Where they'd normally be, maybe playing at a reduced standard of football, whether it's club or school, or not at all in a lot of ways, particularly in the schools. Within that, so that's probably the short story of it. The other element to it is it's a draft-based system. So I worked in rugby league for 3 years, across the senior and the juniors, but under 20s at the time, and we produced our own talent, so SG ball and the different standards, and they worked up, and the club I worked for probably picked off a lot of other academies, but essentially you could produce your own in that way. So within AFL, it's a draft-based system. So while we have an academy, we might not take any of our kids in any given year. So we could go to the draft and take the best kids in Victoria, the best kids from South Australia. And that would depend on where we finish the table. We finish last, we potentially get the best kid in the country. We win the comp, we get the 18th pick. So within that, I obviously work within the academy system in the Swans. I've worked in there for 12 years. I've sort of just come out of it now, trying to get the women's team off the ground. So the big thing, I probably came in at its infancy in the academy, and within that stage, there was no physical development program. It was essentially a skill-based program, because that was seen as the big gap. We need to sort of get the skills of these kids at a level where we can draft them and get them into the system. So I came in and obviously had an eye on the physical development side, working in with the coaches. No gym programs at that time. So over time and through my PhD as well, I found some of the gaps in the program. So we started to develop out the physical development program. So within our academy, it's 2 streams. We have a youth program, 11 to 15, which is predominantly skill-based. And then from sort of 15, 16 to 19, we call it the top end program. So where it's sort of 2-stream skill and physical development. And that is developed over time as well. Gone from 1 gym session a week to 2 gym sessions, gone from an hour session to 2-hour sessions. So that's kind of how the program is built and how it functions. So within that, we've managed to produce, I'd say any given week now, we'd have 6 or 7, maybe 8 academy graduates within the senior team, and a lot of them in key positions. And across the club, we probably have of a squad of 45, we might have, 12 to 15 academy graduates. So, even looking back at soccer, what team would have 7 or 8 of their academy graduates within the Premier League, maybe in their team? So I guess, and over time through the system, we've within the draft being that sort of 1 to 30 within the draft being the top drafts in the country. We've probably produced over the last few years 5 or 6 kids in there. So they're generally ready-made kids to play football from day one. If you're lower than that, or rookie draft, which is but maybe 50 to 100 in the country, there's generally longer development time in there, so they might be given 3 or 4 years possibly in the system. So it's around that 2 to 3 years. If you don't crack it, you might get a contract, you might not. So our top draft picks generally, not always, but they'll generally sort of get in. So going back to the question, there's probably no key KPI the club would look at and say there needs to be this many games played. The academy needs to have this many recruits. There's certainly pressure in the academy if we're not producing talent. Like I think we had 1 year out of the last 10 where we didn't have someone drafted in that year, and there was certainly, you look inward, the club looks inward, how are we doing? I know at the moment there's a bit of a review of the academy and are we hitting the right areas? Are we doing the right development? I think just talking to the skills coaches, there's sort of a push now, just go back to the fundamentals of skill. As programs develop out and as the talent has got better, there's probably a bit of an onus or a bit of a rush maybe to develop the curriculum as well and the skill. So it's a bit of, okay, can we pull it back a little bit? We still need to go through the fundamentals because we're still getting kids 16, 17, 18 where their kicking is not good enough. And kicking is fundamental for the game. Catching and the contact element of the game is there as well. Physical side of it, they generally tick that box. So that's been probably a big plus within the program. Having worked in the men's team, so I had the probably privileged position of being head of the academy, but also working in the men's program. So I could help with the transition and understand the sort of gaps in the program. So I would generally get good feedback on these players are ready-made from a physical point of view to sort of step up and play. And we'd get draftees from South Australia and Western Australia and Victoria who might never have seen the inside of a gym. Now their skill is probably better than what we produce in the academy on the whole, not always, because we have produced some really high picks over the last few years, but physically, there's a ways to go there. And obviously AFL is quite a physical game as well, not the contact of the rugby codes, but certainly got some some elements of contact in it for sure, and change direction and high running loads and all that. So I suppose the key KPIs for me was making sure the kids are physically ready to go. The injury side of it was very important as well. When they're that good at that age, the junior football, the school wants them to get the rep football, whether it's school, state, and they're playing club, they're playing for the Swans, they're playing for the Allies, which is, they selected the best of the rest outside of Victoria. So they're getting selected for a number of different teams. So we kind of lose certain element of control about where they play. Again, it's probably different than the other codes. So we're managing the loads in that way, which is quite challenging. That certainly fell in my area. So how I manage the players loading, because you obviously want to give them the best chance when they are drafted. That was a sort of a big area, big sort of KPI for me was the physical development, making sure they're good to go, but also that sort of injury side of it, and they could tolerate higher training levels once they come into the senior program. So they were probably, without having those key KPIs, it probably was initially, making sure these players, they can train at a higher level, higher standard from a skill point of view, but obviously from a physical point of view, that's just loading through GPS metrics. And then also from a strength point of view, kind of hitting around that second, third year player. And when we do our sort of key metrics we look at. And then overall, I guess, and for the club is they do want to produce that pipeline of players coming through, and they've seen it. And as I said, some of our key players in the senior team now are from our academy. I think any program, any senior program, it looks back in its academy, if it can produce that level of talent, it's probably going to continue to look inward, but they'll always look outward because there'll always be the draft. And if they have the opportunity to take the best kid in Victoria, they're always going to take that kid as well. So it's kind of that twofold approach. They don't sort of stand still. There's always looking at how they can develop the academy, how can they make it better. But I think, yeah, the element of we just can't forget the fundamentals, whether it's the skill development or the physical development, that is really the key. And then from there, the kid is like they realistically train 2, maybe 3 times a week with us in the evening. So we don't get a lot of time with them. So it's not solely what they're doing with the academy is why they're getting drafted, but it's how you manage the loads, training with their club team or the school team, as well as what they're getting through the academy. So yeah, there's a number of different dynamics that goes into it. And overall, as I said, I suppose with the number of players we have through our academy, and the club is quite happy and quite content that, okay, this academy is producing. And over time, we obviously got to keep an eye on that.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, look, I kind of predicted the context of having a professional elite club in Sydney, in New South Wales, that isn't a traditional AFL, heartland. The bit I totally overlooked was the draft system, and how one of your measures of success might actually be producing players for other clubs, which of course happens in other codes, but probably more common in AFL with the draft system. Also, an interesting point as well was, I reckon, compared to Mike in particular, maybe Stuart, was that your players will be away from you in other AFL contexts more than possibly Mike's players. So that liaising and mapping their journey, although some of Mike's players and Stuart's players will be away international national teams as well. So yeah, really interesting. And I suppose everything you said for AFL now in your new context of AFLW is probably even more going to be pertinent as well, I guess, and maybe we can explore that a little bit later. Stuart, loving it. You got your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, it's just the part where to send them away from the club is an important part for and I know football have done it in terms of loan players, but when they get to a certain point, we need to be able to grade them. Particularly reserves is still a junior competition, even though it's a flagship competition, it's still a junior program. So just to make sure they can get loan spells at ugly places sometimes, it's pretty important to grade a player. So while they tracked really well when they're outside, playing for these Championship and Championship 1 clubs, all right, we also understand it's really important in terms of looking at what they're like under extreme pressure, a little bit of trauma, a little bit of discomfort, taking them out the comfort zone, which is pretty important to developing and nurturing the talent at a rugby league club, and that's common practice throughout now.
Yeah, cool. Ray, I don't know if we have any questions from the audience. If we have, great. If we haven't, that's okay. But I will be pushing for some more. How are we going with that?
No questions as yet from the audience. So yeah, just a reminder: type any questions into the chat. We'll come back to that, towards the end of the discussion. I'll jump in with one to maybe spur some questions to come in.
Good.
I'll direct it, Mike, initially to you, but for Stuart and Stephen to give your thoughts as well. It's kind of spurred from Stephen's comment on the skill-based programs up to 15 and then the physical development programs coming in. And I guess, Mike, from your perspective of pre-academy and foundation phase, how do you balance between identifying talent early and basing decisions based on early physical development within football?
No, good question. I think one of the keys, the key thing for us is we don't just have a type of player, we have types of player. So that gives especially in the young phase, and a lot of things that our main thing is it's a UVU model of development. So don't compare me to you, Ray, and how You know, if you're thinking about, well, I'm better than Ray, or I should be that. Well, actually, how can I be better? What's my kind of, and we like talking to the kids, what is their kind of like superpower and how they get better? But you know, we'll have kids that, especially we sign on, we'll have kids who are really technical, who are really really skillful players. We'll have players who might not be as skillful, but physical might have some good physical attributes that we think, oh, they've got potential to do that. We might again have players who are clever, who've got that some game intelligence really. So it's a mixture of them really a younger age, and understanding that, you know, at that age there's such a big difference between the kids could be a little bit more advanced in terms of age technically, but physically they might not. So it's understanding about how they're going to catch up really. And again, I suppose it's looking at, you know, the attributes of certain players. So where do you see that? Where could you see that type of player playing? He's quick, he's strong, you know. What, you know, so again, looking at the parents, what's the size of the parents, and then we could have an idea. Well, actually, we're going to keep that player because actually, when he gets to 13, 14, and he advances, we think he could be a centre half. So that's why we might give that opportunity. So it's about looking at across the board and looking at, so you've got a balance. You know, we couldn't have a team of Mo Salahs because that just, you know, it wouldn't work. So again, it's just looking at the characteristics of the type of the Liverpool player and how they want to play, and then a balance out between them really at that young age.
Thanks for the question, Ray. Thanks, Mike. I'm actually going to go out of order a little bit here, because I think my next question that I planned for you, Mike, follows on quite nicely from that. By the way, I reckon a team of Mo Salahs would still be pretty good. But I'm interested in, you know, we're talking about maturity there and early developers, and it kind of relates to this question around relative age effect. And of course, in your answer, you might just have to sort of explain what relative age effect is. But my question is relative age effect an issue in football? And how do Liverpool strive to recognise it, be aware of it, and support late developers, but also early developers? There was a lot in that question, Mike. Sorry, but unpick it as however you like.
Yeah, no, no, relative age effect. It's not a new phenomenon, but it is. I think people in all sports now were more aware of it and understand it. But I still at times, and I don't think you can get it. I don't think you get away from it early on in the selection process, because it just, you know, someone who's born in the first quartile of the year, you know, can be more physically involved. And I suppose in the UK we're slightly different with it. Most countries, Australia, US, even Europe, go from a January to December. So within that, if you looked at a lot of sports talents, a lot of the talent tends to be, if you've got them all, and I think it's getting better, but in that first quartile, so it'd be January to March. In the UK, we've got a big where ours is, because our year goes from September to August. So a lot of the players that you see, that if you were to get all your players, would be from September to December. Now, I'd like to say that, you know, we are aware of it, and I'll come to and support players in our selection. But if I just took one of our pre-academy groups this year, let's say there's a group of 24, when it comes to October half term, and what the kids tend to do on their birthdays is bring sweets in. So it's their birthday, they bring sweets in. And in the session October half term, at the squad of 24, when 8 players bring sweets, you know, then you've got 2/3 of your squad are born in October. So I think it's difficult, again, because they're the kids that go straight into the grassroots teams when you're looking at things. So they do stand out more. But within the club, we've got players born all the way through to the 31st of August. And we know that if they're an August birthday, you know, if they're shown the good attributes and all that, then you would take, you know, we take them and give them that opportunity. But what we have done with some players is we've moved them down a year. So if we think that they're, you know, not quite technically there, then we'll hold them back a year. Well, not hold them back a year, but actually move them down a year so they get another year development. Thinking of one of the kids whose birthday is the 29th of August, and then he will then move up he's signed with the under 9s, and then probably when he gets to maybe it could be halfway through his under 9s, under 10s, under 11s, he will then be able to go back into his age group and catch up really. So understanding, and that's a good thing, understanding that, you know, yes, he's a talented player, but because he's not quite as, you know, maybe mature or physically developed as the other players, not to just write him off. No, we're gonna look after him. We're gonna spend some time. And as I said earlier, it's one thing that we've done with goalkeepers, and a goalkeeper that, again, last year didn't sign but has now signed, will go back up. And then again, it's just dipping them players, I think, in and out to see how they do with that age group that they should be in. Are they fine with it? And then when they come as normal, then just put them back in that environment. Again, if we've got advanced players and they need to play up, it's good to allow them to train and play as with the age group up, because they might need pushing, they might need that technical side, but I think it's also good to always bring them back down with their peers. One thing that, just this weekend with the 9s and 10s, just as a arrival activity, we play 3v3s with the 9s and 10s all mixed in together. So again, they're getting used to playing at lads who are more physical than them, more technical with them. And then again, especially if you maybe want to do a 9v9, you haven't got enough of the 10s players, you might take one or two of the under 9s players. So again, they're getting used to playing up and working with them players. But it's about, I think I call it a diet. It's about the diet for them players who are more advanced, about being able to play them up to try and push them on, but also looking after them and protecting them, because they might be all right from a technical side or physical, but that social side. And as I said, those who may be late developers, it's kind of, do we think they've got something there? Yes, we do. Okay, what's the best journey and route for them so we can look after them again and nurture them?
Yeah, great, Mark. I think what really came through clearly there was the those decisions based on individuals, and where they are in their physical development. We can probably see that, but and we can probably see the technical. But your point around that social development and psychological development being part of that decision making, I thought was really, really interesting. And look, I think the research shows that if those late developers or those third or fourth quartile players survive, they tend to be the ones that really, really do well. And perhaps maybe that means we've got to do more to support those early developers who seemingly are cruising in the early part of their journey and pathway. So really interesting to hear that Mike. Thank you.
So just one other thing, I think it's a interest as well, especially for us, especially when we go to European tournaments, where we end up having to play like the older 9s with the younger 10s because of how their year, because it's all done by year in Europe, a lot of tournaments really. So again, that's a good opportunity to see your older players and your younger players, especially when they go in European competitions, which and then playing the ones up. So again, when we go to them tournaments, it's a mixed squad really, and in preparation for them squads, they'll train together and get to know each other more really. But then you can see where maybe the players born in the latter year, where they are compared to their counterparts in Europe really at that age.
Yeah, and I was going to say I know, but I get the impression that there's some stuff from the Premier League and clubs around, and maybe EFL clubs as well, around bio-banding competitions and things like that as well, which I think is a very interesting approach. Stuart, I'll come back to you. You touched upon it earlier. You teased us with this stuff about donor sports, football being a donor sport for rugby league in the north. But just broadly, I wonder if talent transfer is a consideration for Salford Reds.
I suppose I just want to make a point where, when Mike's talking about the programs and stuff like that. So for all the listeners, both rugby codes and late specialisation sports, so a number of years ago, they lost some, universally decided to drop those the junior age groups within scholarships and academies and go post maturation. Rugby union have gone on another level now. They don't even contract till they're 18, but they've got a really good resource in terms of their university and FE competitions, whereas rugby league really hasn't got that yet, even though it's coming on a little bit. The development academies that they have in colleges and stuff, which is a safe place for talent as it starts to transfer to adulthood. So yeah, we benefit from, you know, being able to make a more informed decision because it's a late specialisation sport, and it gives what we're going to go on to next, I suppose, talent transfer, points of access for soccer, basketball, rugby union, sports like that. But we still run, everybody still runs in Super League junior programs, like Mike does walking programs. So Salford have Rising Stars that's run by the charity for the foundation there that they have, and they'll have 40 kids turn up on a walking program, and all that's about is just giving them some fun, playing some games with them, problem solving. We're not really, we are tracking and looking for talent at that point that we might ask to come onto the academy. But that, you know, we've got a commitment to the game as a whole to develop these kids that are playing grassroots sports at community clubs, and every club runs one of them. And then towards the back end of the programme, it might run for 8 weeks. The RFL put fixtures on for them, our governing body put fixtures on for them, and that's when some banding probably takes place, when they'll look at, right, you know, what's in that team there. Well, they'll speak to the guy at Castleford and say, well, they're our first quarter birthdays, then they're our first 2 quartiles, and that team's our second quartiles, and they'll match them up like that in a competition. Then you get a more informed things that you might have seen in training for those 6 or 7 weeks, playing in 1 or 2 fixtures. So I just wanted to let the people know that that's what's happening in rugby, both codes. One's really advanced because it's got such a good university programme that covers all that. Sorry about that one, guys. Now, talent transfer, yes, onto that one. Yeah, so that's dynamic as well. Okay, so when you know, there's a lot of clubs in England now, not in rugby, but something we've took from soccer, to be fair, as talent transfer managers. You know, I think the guy at Preston's bilingual because they bring in overseas players. So a kid in our environment, if we do that one first, moving from, you know, the under 16s academy to under 18s and under 18s into first team, they're all talent transfer issues, and there's loads of research that informs us that's when they're most vulnerable, when they're moving through those environments at clubs. One Premiership Rugby Union club where I did some consultancy work with, the first team staff were just throwing the academy kids away. They just, well, who's signed him? Where's he come from? All right, okay, well, are you speaking to them about what you're looking for? You know, what you're looking for in terms of the talent. Are we doing the right things? There's a huge investment down below, but you don't seem to be wanting to take anybody on. Okay, so there's that one. All right, that's managed much better than ever has. Do these transitional coaches kicking around in the sport now, that's helping kids move from one environment to the other. Okay, because they are vulnerable. And yes, if you've got some really fantastic talent, your last quarter birthday, and you're moving through those environments, you know, them kids that you're normally playing against and training with, yes, they can be 12 months older than you. But when you move up an age group again, they can be 3 and 4 years older than you. So that's a really vulnerable time for them. So informing coaching that this talent transfer is part of talent development, part of the talent ID process now, is pretty much established in rugby league. Some do it better than others. Okay. And that's evolving internally. Okay, and constantly being reviewed and refined as well, so they get the best product through in terms of what they're looking for. The second thing is you're bringing things from other sports. So yeah, you've got to have, you know, a club like Salford's got to have a really good footprint. So it's always had a good footprint in rugby in Wales. It's always had some good footprint from kids from Cumbria. So there's 4 or 5 clubs in Salford. So yes, it benefits from rugby league from Oldham and Rochdale and Swinton and perhaps Lee, okay, and a little bit of Warrington, because there's a lot of really good clubs in those areas. Particularly Rochdale and Oldham aren't playing Super League, so we can attract a lot of talent there. But there's rugby union kids as well that come up from Wales, so we've got a good footprint in Wales. We've always had a good tradition from Wales of bringing rugby union players in. And of course, you know, speaking to our head coach, and I share the opinion about the basketball players in Manchester. that's something we need to do much better. Okay, so the RFL as a whole are pushing all the time for look at genuine talent transfer from other donor sports. We've always had, you know, good transfer from soccer players. I could tell you hundreds of stories on them, but we've not really hit that goal, you know, that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which are those, you know, giant mixed race kids in Manchester that are playing basketball and then have nowhere to go to in terms of high performance sport when they're 16 and 17, because there's that many of them. So there's initiative there that we're looking at that we could do better. All right, but also internally, you know, making sure that when we've got the talent, we're doing a really good job with them internally, that we can transfer them, and everybody's aware of the barriers and the difficulties they're going to face as they move through, because of the you know, just moving from one environment to another. 16s to 18 is a big jump, but yes, we consider it. We look all the time. Just to close off, remember when I was at Leeds Rhinos, the head scout got a letter from a guy from the Midlands. It was a PE teacher from the Northwest. He's saying, this is a rugby league player. You've got to have a look at him. He's fantastic. These are all his times and his physical abilities. And so we jumped in a car and we thought, when's the next fixture? And he told us the fixture. But when we got there, it was a basketball game. We were expecting a rugby game. And everything he told us about the kid, he was right. So he kicked on. I think when he actually, we brought him up to Leeds, but he ended up signing for Leeds Tykes. Well, I won't give you his name. Went on to play for England at rugby union, but came into the sport really late. But it was his choice. You know, he wanted to try both sports while he was on trial in the Northwest and chose rugby union. And Stuart Lancaster was smart enough to make sure that they weren't going to let him slip through their hands. And he went on to play for England for a number of tests. I think it was a rugby league player, Sam Burgess, who took his spot in the end. So I'll leave it for everybody to work out who it is, if you like. So I hope I've given everybody enough there to ask some questions anyway.
Yeah, look, Stuart, I must admit, I hadn't interpreted talent transfer and the interpretation of transferring from a level to another level, and certainly that being aware of those differences and support players might need, who might have thrived in one, and now they're suddenly the small fish in the next one, I think is really important. And really, I'd obviously anticipated rugby union to rugby league being a natural, don't know how common, but a natural transfer. But the basketball, I hadn't probably anticipated that one, so that's really interesting. And I'm looking at Stephen now, going, maybe I should have saved this question for Stephen, around maybe the Gaelic sports transitioning into AFL, and particularly with AFLW when it started. It seemingly, from an outsider's perspective, seemed to be a deliberate feature of putting together teams. But I'll let Stephen decide whether he touches upon that. But your question, Stephen, is a broad one. It's what aspects of the Sydney Swans talent development program have been of particular focus over the last few years, and you touched upon this definitely in your first answer. But what's changed in Sydney Swans talent development thinking and processes and systems? Yeah,
sure. I'll just quickly say, Stuart will be happy. We probably lost our next best draftee to rugby league. He's just gone and he's captain of one of the underage teams. I think under 20s now they call them. So he's the next big thing in there. So we've just lost him, unfortunately. And we do as well. We would look at basketballers, particularly, would be a big area transfer. And obviously, Gaelic footballers have been able to make that transition. Different type of ball to kick, and I'll sort of touch on that with the what we're looking at in the focus. But in the female game, is the gap in that skill level isn't that big. And my sort of take is the Gaelic footballers have really good game sense, and now it's about how to sort of move on a footy field and evasion game. And it's because a lot of the girls have, we've got draftees who've picked up the game post 20, mid-teen. So that's evolving. Obviously, the men's competition is a little bit more challenging in that regard. You kind of have the lead end of the Gaelic football to make it. every team across the board physically is strong. So it's then, you know, whether you can get your skills good enough in a short period of time, I suppose, that. But yeah, going back to what our focus is, yeah, so certainly while we have sort of, as I touched on, produced some good talent through our program, we don't sort of sit in our hands and think, oh, we're doing a great job here, not changes. So within our youth program, being that skill development program, really in AFL, the ability to kick the ball like an oval ball, if you've ever tried to kick it, it's sort of different than your rugby code ball. It's heavier, travels further. So like we'll get some of our ex-players coaching in rugby league, and one of coaching the AFLW program coaches in the rugby league at the moment, just that kicking element to it. But certainly it is a fundamental skill to pick up. And myself growing up on the other side of the world and being a big football fan, a big Liverpool fan, so it's nice to have Mike on. I would look at, like, back in the day, footballers going to watch games and they would make a ball sing, like their level of skill, and whether it's just, you know, 10,000 hours of just kicking the ball and touching the ball. You don't quite see that in AFL. Maybe it's just the dynamic of the game. It probably is more of a later specialization. However, I think if you don't hone some of the skills early enough, very hard to get them, and kicking being probably the main one. So, example of me. So my young boy, he just started in the academy on their 10s, and he'd go back and play his club. He's only started this year, but the coach of the club would go, how can he kick the ball so well? And I go, he's been kicking the ball since he's 3. Nothing I've done. It's just he's gravitated to kick a ball, and he just does it in the house. So it's just that constant. So we kind of looked at, you know, probably through the last few years, we'd sort of go, why? Yes, we're getting this top end talent who have elite skills, but why is there such a disparity between sort of the top, the middle, and the bottom? You know, we need numbers in the academy for training sessions, for play games, you know, money to keep the academy going, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, why is there a big disparity between the top? So as we said, we wouldn't train a lot, maybe compared to some other codes. With these kids, they play other sports, so not just AFL. They're also at that post 16 playing some other sports, so we have that challenge. So how can we sort of encourage them to pick a football up and kick it more? So that's probably just a big one, not just with us, it's what they do outside. So how can we develop that skill, which is really fundamental? So the program that youth program has come back and gone, okay, let's just teach those fundamentals: kicking, catching, handball, ground balls, you know, real basic skills. So that's really been the focus of the last couple of years. What's the curriculum look like? How can we develop that? Probably moving on from there, similar to the rugby codes or the collision sports, you need to be a competitor in AFL. Like, the nature of the contact in it, you need to want contact, you need to enjoy the contact, you need to be able to cope with some contact. So if you're not a competitor, you're probably not going to make it. Okay, if you don't enjoy that contest element to it, you're probably not going to make it. So that's probably more of a challenge, so how we bring that in, and how a little bit of an innate thing, I suppose. Like, you look at kids, they enjoy contact, or they don't. Might have been getting beaten up at home with a brother or whatever it may be. So it's sort of, how do you hone that side of it? Yes, you can give them some skills, and, you know, we sort of lean on the rugby codes for that, get coaches in, teach some of that tackle technique. But really, you know, is that going to happen in the heat of the moment? It's sort of questionable. That's one element to it. And probably the other one, which would be nice to sort of talk to Stuart and Mike and their ideas, is that game sense. So again, probably the two big gaps is game sense and understanding about just how to play the game and where to go. I would see a big gap even within the sort of senior women's team, because they haven't played the game that long. So they might come into me and go, oh, my GPS was good on the weekend. And I go, how many touches did you get? And they go, 4. Obviously, say it nicely, but it's what they're doing for their efforts is a big thing. Because I would just always refer them back to the skills. What did the coaches say? Do they think you played? You might have played a selfish game where you just didn't get the ball, but you did your role. So how that element of, you know, your physical output matches up with your skill output is so important. But the game sense element to it, probably a big gap as well, is understanding about where to go on the field, what to do, how to use your energy. Because it's a given that you need to have a high aerobic capacity in AFL. If you don't have it, again, it's a bit like the competitive side, you're not going to probably make it. Probably an element that we've looked at where we've drafted from the rookie side of it in the academy, and they're more of a longer term is speed. So the element of speed, again, if you have that real speed in certain positions in the team, it is, and like Liverpool the last few years, just watching them play, that element of speed and attack, like it's so important. So having an element of speed, yes, you need aerobic capacity, but if you have some speed in key positions, it's gonna help as well. So that's kind of, some of our big draftees over the last few years. Speed probably hasn't been their big I suppose positive for them, but certainly the aerobic capacity is always very high, and then their skill and their kicking ability is being elite. And the competitors, they're all competitors across the board. So that's kind of probably the nuts and bolts and some technical, some physical side of it. But the other element we've decided, because we don't know at 15, 16 whether a kid's really going to make it, there's probably, you have a real sort of inkling. So we've, within both academies, so we have a male and female stream in the academy. Female stream has come in the last 3 to 4 years, is we've sort of broadened it to 19, 20 kids now. So we're holding them on for longer. So instead of just letting them go and you might go to South Australia, Victoria, and try and develop there, and then you've kind of lost them. Particularly, we sort of pick a core group of 5 or 6, thinking there may be something there, maybe a rookie draft. So that extra year of physical development, they'll train within the VFL team, which is the sort of second reserve team within AFL, so they get that opportunity, and they also get to play within the academy system as well. You can sort of play, I think it's maybe 3 or 4 19s. So they're still being looked at by recruiters. Because again, ultimately, it's nice if we draft them in-house, and we generally do. The academy itself wants these kids to be drafted around the country as well. We've had a couple of kids been picked up by their club. That's probably the real success of the academy. We're producing for the other teams as well. Like, we just can't take them ourselves. So yeah, I think probably those key elements of looking at the youth program, that kind of mid-range where they start to do more contest competitive work. How can we hone that? The game sense is the big one. Like, what drills, what sort of small-sided, small teams games can we work on that? Physical development side, that just keeps rolling now. It gets honed and refined, but I think we're sort of at a good point where when they do get drafted, they're physically quite strong. Then if we can just hold on to them for that little bit longer, we may be able to get a draftee or a rookie out of it. So
brilliant. Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Look, it was interesting. Mike was talking earlier about throwing that net into different places and keep throwing out nets, and I'm glad you sort of top that off by trying to keep people or extending the talent development program. Stuart, for the first time, I'm going to ignore your hand. Okay, I apologise. The reason being, we're going to be out of here at 7:15. We've got 7 minutes left. I want to cram as much in as we can. I'm going to see if Ray's got any questions, and I'm going to ask our panelists to try to answer in between 30 seconds and a minute, which I know is really hard, because I would still like to see if there's a chance for you guys to ask each other's questions. Ray, yes, have we got any questions in there, buddy?
We've got 3 questions, so I'll perhaps direct one to each of you to make sure we keep things moving along. So I'll start with you, Stuart, if that's okay. Question from James Barraclough on the psychosocial elements as opposed to physical, technical, and tactical, and how would you go about testing for these psychosocial elements when recruiting? Is it mostly coach's eye, or do you use other methods? And then how do you also develop those characteristics as well?
Good question, James.
Yeah, I think if you track it back to your coaching, not particularly scouting, they're looking for something that's dynamic, powerful, and fast, and can evade and kick and pass. But it's when your coaches on your pathways, they're aware of psychosocial skills. They're aware of Jack Lezick's 9 skills of successful athletes, the PCDEs. They're pretty much educated in those psychological attributes now. There's questionnaires that can be done, and you might pick a number of Jack Lezick's models really good to look at because it's already periodized. It tells you what to do on phase 1, 2, and 3. So there's a really good foundation of 4 or 5 things, or maybe 3 or 4 things to look at and educate coaches on, and then have conversations about what that looks like in training in games, and are we looking out for that. And yeah, there's the PCDs questionnaire and things like that. So it depends how far you want to go and how well educated your workforce is. All right, and how experienced it is in talent, in transferring talent, so they know what attention focus looks like, commitment looks like. They can self-regulate, right? Okay, how do we know we're self-regulating? And a lot of coaches, can't articulate resilience as it's badged up, but they can say, well, they just persevere, they never give up, they've got bounce back ability. So, once you train your coaches on right, all that sits inside resilience, doing your extras sits inside regulation, living the right life and getting your sleep right, and collecting the post pads up and tidying up, all fits inside regulation. It's about aligning all that coaching vocabulary into what them psychosocial skills look like, and of course, I've been doing it a long time, and I'm trained in psych. I can manage some junior coaches, but then we'd always make sure that every part of every Super League academy has an intern psych that helps us, all right, articulate mental skills and psychosocial skills. So that's become more precise, much better than what it was when it was just goal setting in 1995, to where it is today, where our coaches on the pathway at Salford and many other places in rugby league can really articulate what mental skills look like for an under 15 and under 16. And again, periodizing those things into training as well, and putting, developing coaches so they can actually embed and integrate those mental skills into their practice. Some of the stuff that Stephen talked about before, about problem solves and game-based practices, it's synthesized into those games. Yes, we won't overload it with every single one of the 9 PCDs, but we might be looking for a particular one for a kid to be able to see if he can actually articulate that in his problem solving, how he tries to unravel and outmaneuver the opposition and in the game. So I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Another question on a similar vein, I guess, for Mike, which is, you mentioned game intelligence earlier. So I guess looking at which attributes make up game intelligence in a talented young footballer, and that one's from Dan Owen.
Without going too sciencey on this, I suppose we're talking about younger players as those the ones who can anticipate things that are quickly going on, kind of like from a defensive point of view. If they've lost possession, do they just stand still, or do they just chase the ball? Are they able to sense danger? The players who come up with solutions themselves, those players, if you put on a practice, will test the rules on you and come up with a solution because they're just thinking of it a different way, which is another way. Those who might try and do something, they might try and make a certain pass, or they might try and you can see the intention, the execution, but it might be the fit physically why they couldn't play along the pass, or technically they haven't got another. So them little things are some of the things that we tend to look at a younger age, really.
Great. And then, cheers, Mike. I'll come to Stephen for the final question from Esteban Mesalam, which is, if you could narrow down the systems and the programs that you've put in place, what makes you most proud of I guess what you've created and what you've produced so far?
So for me, like, I've been around the club when there's been sort of relative success. Like the Swans have missed, if you say, making finals twice in the last 22 years. My time there, we won the grand final. We're in 2, we lost 2. And over here, if you lose a final, you're nothing. But it's sort of relative success. So, but I would look back at my time, and the actual, probably my happiest is nearly the rookies that got drafted from the academy, because they're the real guys that had the battle to make it, and they really had to show something. So, sort of working with them through the years, developing them, particularly if they got developed, maybe weighted more in a physical capacity over skill, obviously. that really, and then, you know, spending that last year before they get drafted where it's not sure it's a line ball call and just really pushing them and getting them across the line. And then the players who, you know, they were drafted 2 years out, they're going to be a high draft pick, talked about, was really just aligning their program. So when they come in, they hit the ground running. So for me, definitely, while I did have worked in senior programs and I'm back in the senior program, it's probably that development side. And Stuart and Michael probably say the same, is you do get that gratification when you see these kids and they do make it, and you have sort of had a little impact on the development.
Right, thanks for that, and thank you to our great questions, brilliant questions asked by the audience there. Look, I've got loads of weaknesses. One of them as a host is sticking to time, as is clear. If people are happy to stay on, I'm going to allow one panelist to jump off mute and ask the other panelist or panelists a question that they would love to hear the answer to. And we haven't planned this, so there may be silence or all three might jump off. It's going to be anarchy. Let's see what happens. We're good. They don't want to ask. Stuart, you haven't got a question for Mike and Stephen. Mike, you haven't got a question for Stuart and Stephen. Stephen, you haven't got a question for Michael, Stuart.
Mine was just the one I asked earlier, is like within their systems, like how do they develop that game sense, that now? So what is the strategy? Is it a learned process they get themselves, or are you guys got any skill drills, anything you put in there, anything outside the program that you sort of do with the problem solving skills, anything?
Stuart, you got your hand up. Looks like you're going to answer it. Mike, unless you're desperate to answer, you can relax.
I'll be quick. What was there's a drive towards gimmicks, and they work. All right, so I'm not sure it works in terms of like problem solving in a game, giving a game direction, giving you game design, some problems to be solved, and giving kids superpowers and stuff like that. And it's really good, but it doesn't develop the coach's pedagogy either. So he's got to suffer and struggle too in his game design. Okay, so I think that's pretty important. So when we think, so when we give a coach a particular skill or a tactic to deliver in training, it's about, we're games-based practices. The research out there, there's loads of link between learning and fun. That's what we do. Okay, but then he's got to develop his own intuition, his own way of developing relationships with athletes inside that as well. Okay, and he's got to have a certain amount of challenges and progressions that he needs to be able to do that. So, yes, we've got to develop the emotional intelligence in players. We've also got to develop it in the coaches as well. All right, and how that connects and the relationship that's formed in and around the skills. So we spend quite a lot of time, Mike, Steve, on game design and problem solving and decision making, co-creation, collaboration. But really, we put the coach under pressure. He can't, it might have a go-to activity that might work, right? And then there's certain things in it. Is it games? Is it north to south? How represented is it? Okay. Is it got a battery of questions and it's got progression? Has it got constraints? Is it non-linear? Is it messy and ugly? So yeah, and I think I've been in some sticky situations, I'll be as quick as I can both, where my training looks terrible. Okay, well, that's the phase they're going through. They're going through that ugly phase. So everybody at the club, hold your nerve, because in 6 weeks' time, it'll look completely different. Okay, we'll be on the other side of it. The IQ of both coach and player would really evolve. So I hope that's helped a little bit. And if you wanted to dig into any of it, no problem.
No, that's perfect. It's that element of how much does the coach want to let it get ugly and all. Yeah, it's some really good points there.
Thank you. I am going to make an executive decision to draw a close to tonight's proceedings, which I've really enjoyed, and I hope everybody else has. That we have recorded it. Myself and Ray actually haven't spoken about what we're going to do with the recording, but I'm sure we will make it available somehow, and we hope to do that as soon as possible. We'll also be following up with an email tomorrow. We'd really love your sort of views on this format, a little bit different to the ones I've been involved with before, where I can't see the audience faces. And I missed that a little bit, but I'll ask some questions around the format and ways that I think myself and Ray are very keen to do some more of these, and we'd really like your feedback on how we can continue to improve them and add value to your own maybe your coaches, or you're just interested in the topic, but your own context as well. So please look out for that email. But most importantly, I'd like to thank people out there for either sparing a bit of time in your morning if you're in the UK, or your evening if you're in Australia. We really appreciate people making the time to invest in their own understanding and taking time to listen to our experts. And that obviously leads me on to thanking Stuart, Mike and Stephen for sharing their expertise and the things they do with their athletes and in their clubs. Sometimes elite sport and talent development gets, an idea that people aren't prepared to share, but I actually think it's the opposite. I think people that are really confident in what they're doing and can articulate what they're doing are really prepared to share. And I've personally loved the cross code and the cross UK Australia dynamic of this webinar. So that's great. And Ray, thank you very much for you supporting me on this and co-hosting with me. I will leave the last word to you before I end tonight's session.
No, you wrapped it up really well. And yeah, big thanks to you, Gareth, for pulling this all together. And hope to see everyone again soon.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Thank you.